Net Sciences President Joshua Liberman and ChannelPro's Colleen Frye joins us this week to discuss news from Nerdio, Fortinet and Huntress, and an article about managing remote workers, plus a special guest interview with CloudCheckr CTO Jeff Valentine. It's ChannelPro Weekly number 174, Branches of One. Hello and welcome to ChannelPro Weekly episode 174. My name is Matt Whitlock, technology editor, online director, and your host of this fine program for people like you. And who are you? Go ahead. Get in front of the mirror, give yourself a once-over up and down, and you will come to the realization that you are a managed services provider, a VAR, an integrator, an IT consultant. Yes, you'll probably come to the realization that you're a human being. At least I hope so. I don't know if our audience is intergalactic yet, Rich, but it's quite possible at this point. So if you're one of those things, you're in the right place. If you're an Eskimo looking for a new pair of shoes, you're actually surprisingly in the right place today too. So there's a little bit of everything for one and all here at ChannelPro Weekly. We welcome you all. Joining me this weekend, pretty much every week, is the man of the hour, our fantastic co-host here, executive editor Rich Freeman. Welcome, Rich.
Welcome, Matt. And I qualify to be here because I am a human being.
And that's really all you need, a human being with maybe some ears and a nose. Noses are important, Rich. Although I do feel bad.
And check, got them both.
So his list is complete. Awesome. You know who else, Rich, has an ear and a nose? Who's also here? Do you know?
I don't. Who is?
I'm going to tell you. Our wonderful guest we have on from time to time, managing editor here at ChannelPro, Colleen Frye. Welcome, Colleen.
Hey, Matt. Hey, Rich. And yes, I do indeed have a nose.
It's a lovely one at that, I might say. So Rich, Colleen is going to be here to kind of chime in a little bit with the news and also talk about a story that ran in the ChannelPro magazine. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. On the agenda today for this episode, we'll be talking about a story that ran in our January issue that Colleen wrote, and so we will get the insider's point of view on that subject matter. And I can tell you from my own experience, we put as much down on the page as we can, but there's always kind of a more material, a deeper angle on the story that you can't quite fit into however much real estate we have available in the magazine. So it'll be good to have Colleen here. She spoke to these people firsthand, and it'll be an interesting conversation.
That is going to be great. We're all looking forward to that. And Rich, if this were like an infomercial for a food processor, this is when I would say, but wait, there's more. We, in fact, are joined by an awesome guest host today. He just popped on the screen there for a brief moment. So I'm really excited. Our guest host today started the PC services in 1990, providing Novell networking and becoming a master CNE. Since starting Net Sciences in 1996, he has built and secured hundreds of networks in New Mexico and its surrounding area. He's also been a rock and ice climber, a martial artist, a lifelong photographer, and on top of that, if that's not enough, he's an avid traveler that speaks 5 languages, and he even raises Siberian Huskies. So please welcome the president and founder of Net Sciences, Joshua Liberman. Welcome, Josh.
Woof. So because in cyberspace, nobody really knows if you're a dog, then that's the last group of 4. Nonetheless, thank you very much for the intro. I didn't even remember all that stuff myself. The good news is it's all pretty much true. So I'm happy to be here, and I took a look through what we're going to be talking about, some of which I had a lot of background in, and some of this stuff I didn't even know was happening. So I'm looking forward to learning as I go.
Well, good. Yeah, we're looking forward to having you chime in here. So Joshua, let me just pause for a second here and say you have those dogs behind you. So for those who are listening, he's got a virtual background of Siberian Huskies behind him, and when you taught them how to stay, you got it dead on. Like, those dogs are not moving at all.
They have their limitations. There are other dogs and fast moving objects that'll break their stay, and there's the occasional type of food, but they're pretty amazing. I mean, training dogs is fun and pretty good. Some breeds are amazing. They can walk with them. Essentially, they're better than some of the folks you can hire. But other breeds like Siberians are not quite so easy to train. If anybody wants a very major takeaway, train them 1 at a time. I tried to train them 3 or 4 at a time. They'll turn that around. They're the pack, you're not. So you really need to individually train each of them. Then you can put them together as a pack, and they're still fairly well trained.
I'm telling you, Matt, we could spend this entire episode talking about Josh's dogs. I've heard amazing stories about the Siberian. These are very, very smart animals, and Josh can attest to that. Give us one good, because I've heard some that just freak me out. How could dogs be that smart?
Well, they work well as a team, and it's not uncommon for one or two of them to thoroughly distract you while one or two of them are doing something that none of them could have done alone. Whether that's climbing over each other to get over an obstacle while you're distracted, or working together to open a gate. They're pretty damned amazing. I'm almost certain I've interacted with tech support folks that aren't in their class. They just, and the teamwork. I guess the number one thing is they're tactical and they work as a team, and you better pay attention.
It's incredible stuff. And, Joshua, I know we could probably even spend the entire episode just talking about some of the varied hobbies you have and some of the traveling you've done. There's always an interesting story or 700 from you whenever we get together. So it's great. I want to talk a little bit about kind of your business background, about Net Sciences and kind of how all that came to be. But I want you to like, of all of the things that you've done, like rock climbing, ice climbing, are you still actively doing all of those things, or what are you kind of doing today?
No, rock climbing and ice kind of fell by the wayside as I dove into my business, and it's been an honest 20 years since I've been a mountaineer and a real climber. And some of the last things I did were in the States, Mount Rainier, Aconcagua in South America, although I only got to about 20,000 feet there. I got stormed off. I never even saw the top of that mountain the whole 10 days I was there. I didn't see it until I was on my honeymoon years later from a park. And for a moment, the top cleared. It was the first time I ever saw it. I haven't been an active competitor in martial arts for 15 years. I collected several dozen broken bones before I finally decided waking up without pain was more valuable than training. But I do still train without competition. In all the other pursuits, the ones that hang in there are languages, reading, and photography, and of course travel. And up till last year, I was averaging about 50 flights a year for 20 years. Last year, I made 8 flights, and I didn't leave the country, and that hasn't happened, the not leaving the country, since about 2000. So it changed. I think this year it'll slowly change back, but that's a whole nother discussion.
So are you like Rich? Did you buy like a used airline seat to put in your house? You could go sit in it and be like, I remember what this was like.
There are people who buy guns and never shoot them because they love guns and they collect them and they do things like that. And I'm the different kind of gun guy. I shoot a few guns and I like how they work and I learn about them. But I can't imagine buying a gun I would never shoot. So I'm not the fanboy. I wouldn't have an airline seat in my home. Although my bathroom is very similar to a 737 in size. I have a few little Phillips here and there that can be directly traced to a very mild airline fetish. But I'll tell you, the one thing I miss the most, and it came up in a book that I'm in the middle of reading this week called Deep Work, is I wrote, I think you guys might know that I've written roughly 40 published things for you guys since 2009. Almost every article, if not every one, was written on an airliner until last year. Last year is the first time I've written for you or almost any publication where I wasn't sitting in a seat. And people, how can you possibly do that? Actually, if you put on noise canceling headphones and nothing else, no sound, and you start typing, it's a great way to work. It's a real, make sure you don't have internet access enabled, and it's great. So anyway, you asked about the business just very quickly. I started an early business in 1990 called PC Services. It was a hobby. I worked full time for 5 years and built up a handful of clients and $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in income out of it. And at the end of 95, I left DOE and the related contractors I worked with and decided if I was going to work for an asset, might as well be me. And I went out on my own after a few months of reading about marketing, advertising, and legal stuff. And at the end of 95, started Net Sciences, changing the name that I used to have. And I went forward from there. Picked up, I think I started with 2 of those clients and moved forward. I always tell people we're heavily security focused, but I also point out that that's a little bit like a fish saying they're very focused on water. Of course, we're very security focused, or we'll die. Our clients will fail if we're not. But I know that after doing this for so long in this small market, that most of the, if not all, maybe most of the MSPs just don't have the depth and breadth. And I can say that of the 12 security specific vendors we work with, 8 of them have no other New Mexico partners. Now, that doesn't mean as much as it sounds like, but it's still an indicator that we're pretty deep there. And that is still what we do. And there isn't a month that goes by that we don't fine tune something. And there isn't a quarter that goes by that we don't experiment with a new product or service security related.
Yeah, fantastic. I know you guys do a lot there, and you've been working at it for a long time. And I can personally attest, Joshua was one of the smartest guys in the business that I know from a technical perspective. Very, very knowledgeable about security and hardware, and basically, you can kind of talk about anything. You're a pretty broad guy, and I mean like knowledge wise, not like shoulders wise.
Well, I've only picked up 1 pound during the COVID year, so I feel like I've accomplished something there. So yeah, I'm pretty broad, but not much more broad than I was a year ago.
Well, awesome stuff. So, well, great to have you here. And Colleen, I don't want to forget about you over there. You've been on with us as a guest numerous times, so a lot of our audience is pretty familiar with you. But for those who are new to the show today, why don't you give us a quick little 1, 2, 3 about Colleen Frye?
Well, I'm coming to you today from snowy Boston area, and which is kind of fun because it is January, so not unexpected. I've been with ChannelPro really since issue 1 as a freelancer, and then came on full-time in 2017. And here I am. You've been stuck with me for nearly 15 years now.
All right, well, why don't we go ahead and switch gears and talk about the news, because we got a lot to get through. We got a story about Nerdio, Fortinet is in the news, Huntress, and Colleen is here to talk about an article that's called Managing Branches of One. Very, very interesting article. Plus, we've got a really great interview coming up with Jeff Valentine, the CTO of CloudCheckr. We recorded that yesterday. We'll put that in there, but Josh was able to come and join us for that too. And a great interview, very, very informative, very insightful. And I think you'll understand that Eskimo crack that we had at the beginning of the show, plus a whole lot more. So let's dive in. Rich, our first story, Nerdio ships it's a long title. You tell us about it.
Yeah, well, and this is news that came out of their first partner conference, NerdioCon, which they hosted this week online, obviously. This takes me back. I'll circle back to this a little bit later, but I mean, I have kind of watched the Nerdio journey, not exactly from the beginning, but close. The very first time I met their CEO, it was the first time that we hosted one of our conferences in Chicago. They're based in Chicago, and Vadim Vladimirsky, who has actually been on this podcast about a year ago, he agreed to drive out to that whatever hotel we were at near O'Hare and meet with me and tell me about the company. And at that time, they had what was essentially you could think of it as an SBS replacement, an SMB environment in a box. And they ran it entire and streamed it. It was 100% streamed. That was what was really kind of unique about it, is you consumed it over the internet. And they hosted it all in their own cloud. Over time, more and more of their partners said it would be nice to have the option to run it in Microsoft Azure instead. And so they created an option to do it in Microsoft Azure. And then again, over time, they got to be really good with Azure. Like that became almost their specialty, is that they really understand how to implement and run an Azure environment. And so they came out once upon a time with a product called Nerdio for Azure, which is, targeted at the absolute newcomer to Azure. That environment can be a little intimidating to you if you've never been there before, and if you're trying to stand up an infrastructure for a customer in there for the first time. And so Nerdio for Azure kind of automates and orchestrates and simplifies that process a great deal. Very much designed, though, again, for the greenfield deployment, the newcomer to Azure. So about a year ago now, March 2020, they introduced a new product, and this one is not really for MSPs. This one is targeted more at IT departments, and mostly, although not exclusively, IT departments at larger businesses. Because they were intrigued by Nerdio for Azure, but they said, look, we don't need help setting up the infrastructure. We've already done that. We need help managing it. It would be great if you guys had a tool that we could use that would just kind of add some of the management smarts to what we already have. And so and in particular, they were interested in this because they were interested in Windows Virtual Desktop. And so they needed some assistance handling that. And so March 2020, Nerdio introduces Nerdio Manager for WVD, or Windows Virtual Desktop. And it's a version of their product that's designed for people who already have some existing Azure resources in place, gives them some management tools, and helps them especially with WVD. And then the other thing that's significant about it is that that product is not hosted in Nerdio's Azure instance, Azure Farm, or whatever you want to call it. It's software that you download, you deploy on your Azure instance. So if you're a corporate IT department, you're concerned about security, you don't want to share a tenant, you can do that with that product. So what they announced this week was a new version of that product called Nerdio Manager for MSP. Because MSPs saw this product for corporate IT departments, said, well, you know, I've got some existing Azure resources too that I'd just like to add some management to. It would be great if you had a product like that I could use, but if I'm going to use it, it's got to be multi-tenant. And so, you know, in essence, that's what Nerdio did. They took Nerdio Manager for WVD. They created a multi-tenant version of that. They added a number of additional features that are very MSP specific, and they unveiled that this week at their show. They say it will plug into an existing Azure environment within 10 minutes. It is by no means exclusively for people who already have Azure resources in use. If you do want to do a greenfield deployment with the system, you can do that as well, or you can use it for what Nerdio refers to as a landing zone deployment. There are some people out there who have the basics of an Azure environment set up, but they really need to kind of fill it out with all the services you need to make it useful, and that's something that this new Nerdio Manager product can do. And Nerdio says it can take you 2 to 4 hours to do some of that. We'll help you do it in less than an hour. In addition to Windows Virtual Desktop, which again is a primary use case for this tool and the corporate IT version, you can manage virtual machines, backups, Azure AD implementations, including the users and the groups. There is a wizard-driven cost estimator. So you can, for planning purposes, you can kind of understand if I use this set of reserved instances and you know, that SLA or whatever, here's what it's going to cost me. And then they will monitor the environment and adjust it dynamically over time to keep it cost optimized. And Nerdio says that the auto scaling piece of that can reduce compute and storage costs up to 75%.
And so, Rich, you said that's a wizard-driven cost estimator. Which wizard runs it?
That would be the Wizard of Azure.
Is it Gandalf, perhaps, or Wizard of Oz? With the Wizard of Oz.
Which wizard runs it, you say?
Well, they said it was wizard-driven. I wanted to know which wizard was behind the wheel. All right, go ahead, Rich.
I'm just about there. Actually, I just want to point out, because there are Nerdio has something like 1,000 MSP partners right now, almost all of whom are using Nerdio for Azure, and that product's not going away. From Nerdio's standpoint, this is kind of the next generation of that product, and it's you know, superior in certain ways, but Nerdio for Azure does things that the new product doesn't. I mean, WVD didn't exist when they created Nerdio for Azure, so that system uses RDS. And there are people out there who need to use RDS. And so Nerdio for Azure isn't going away. They're going to keep maintaining it, updating it, selling it, supporting it, you know, indefinitely at this point. But I think over time, they'll be looking to migrate people onto the new system.
Excellent. So I want to turn the discussion quickly over to Joshua. So I'm sure you manage a lot of things in Azure and various infrastructure deployments in Azure. Are you looking for tools like this to kind of help you manage that, set things up faster, easier, or are you kind of beyond this level of tool?
Quite the opposite. And I have to say that we actually don't manage very much in Azure.
Really?
No, one of the downsides of being here where I live is bandwidth. It's scarce, or at least stable bandwidth. We have, of course, cable bandwidth like every major city or minor city nowadays in the States, but it's exceptionally unreliable. We have literally dozens of outages a month at some sites, and moving them to a cloud-hosted environment is extremely problematic. We have fiber in a lot of the city, but it's typically 4 figures and up per month. There's no such thing as a $200 fiber bill. There was, we had a shared fiber solution that CenturyLink pulled from our market recently. I'm extremely well acquainted with it because I finished getting it installed yesterday. That fiber is in my building. I don't know when it'll be turned up, but that took 2 years, believe it or not.
Wow.
It's just a struggle. Fiber is tough, and without fiber, you're sometimes twisting in the breeze, especially when you can't get DSL and there isn't any third alternative for you. So we have very little what I would call true market penetration or true cloud penetration. Of course, we are 100% Office or M365. So if you know enough about that, you realize that means you're in Azure. What we've done is slowly moved workloads bit by bit. We don't ever walk over to somebody and say, let me put you in the cloud. That just doesn't sell well. But we have slowly moved workloads bit by bit. Nerdio appeals to me primarily because they're the training wheels to Azure. I think that a lot of MSPs, and I hope that this isn't defamatory towards Nerdio, I think they realize that a lot of people learn this way. They get a handle on how pricing and delivery and allocation and everything, provisioning works in Azure, but it's kind of a nice front end that they get to, or not kind of, it's a wonderful front end they get to use for everything from calculations to service delivery and management. But a lot of MSPs tend to outgrow it, and my guess is that's part of what's behind the driving their new product, their new delivery system. And they're hoping to capture those and have people mature into bigger MSPs with better Azure skill sets, but remain Nerdio clients. That's probably where we're going. WVD to me, or any kind of VDI infrastructure, and I'm just going to say virtual desktop for the few folks that don't know it, or Windows Virtual Desktop, that's an amazing capability. That is true. That brings location and device independence to people that we can't do any other way without WVD or some sort of VDI solution. That's close to the Holy Grail. I mean, I'd like to know that every time we boot one of those machines, we tear it down to bare bones and bring it up clean. I'd like to have, a clean boot environment every single time somebody logs out. I know that that's a little bit tricky or hard to sell, but that WVD VDI solution is where we want to be. But of course, that leans even more heavily on stable bandwidth. It's one thing if folks lose access to some of their data or their email flow when internet is out. It's an entirely another thing when they get a blank screen if their internet service is out. So we're going to be moving there more slowly than many locations, but we'll get there. And I do have roughly a quarter of our sites on fiber now, even our own pretty soon. So as that develops, we'll get better and better. But right now, Nerdio is going to be my go-to choice simply because I need those training wheels. And I feel terrible starting 2021 telling people we're practically Azure virgins here, but it's truthful. It's just the true story here.
Yeah, you don't really think about how when you're trying to put things up into the cloud, having stable, reliable internet really is kind of a necessity before any of that makes sense for a company. And if you're in an area that doesn't support it, I guess you would have to go a little slower. And
people, I have these people all the time, vendors telling me you can do 150 miles an hour flat out with their new product, but you have to have highways to do 150 miles an hour. In the 1800s, the highways were railroads. In the 1900s, they were interstates. And in this millennium, they're the internet, I'm sorry. And we have very good highways, and there's still some pretty good track running through the state, but we just aren't there with bandwidth. And every couple of years, Lucy puts the football down and Charlie runs up to kick it. We just brought in 2 or 3 Facebook data centers 20 miles south of Albuquerque in the last year. And part of the stipulations were that we're bringing in a lot of bandwidth, and it was supposed to be carved off for access to the city. But they pulled that bandwidth from Lubbock direct to Los Lunas, and it didn't come through Albuquerque. So they brought in, I don't know this for a fact, but I would estimate they brought in roughly half as much bandwidth as the whole city had, and we didn't get any. And that's the third such development of its sort to bypass the city since I've been beating my head against this particular wall. So at some point this will happen, but I can tell you it's still a long struggle. And there are many MSPs in Albuquerque that do deliver and provision Azure or related cloud hosted services without anything more than Comcast. But they don't have a client base that hasn't had a day of outage in 20 years. And we do. And it's really hard. And I tried, and we lost them twice. We've tried to move people to cloud only, but all they had was Comcast, and that just didn't work out. You know, they can't, it's so hard to readjust your expectations from flawless to faulty operations.
Right. Yeah. It seems like a step backwards in that case for many of the customers.
Hugely so.
Yeah. Hey, and is it just me, or is it every time somebody says VDI or WVD, it sounds like some kind of disease?
It is not just you, but it's not me. So it's, the good news is that it's not easily transmissible, but yeah, I've got to tell you, the whole year of COVID, I kept thinking to myself, I know you guys can always edit this out, but I kept thinking to myself, I really missed the time where to kill somebody by mistake, you had to have sex with them, because that's just not the case anymore. Okay. I know that'll probably get that. Anyway,
I don't know. Rich and I'll have to go to the censors on that one and see what they say. But I think that's a good time to move on to our next story before that one spirals out of control. Rich, Fortinet is in the news. They have rolled out something AI powered. That's always exciting when there's AI powered things.
Yeah. Well, this is an interesting product. So you have heard of endpoint detection and response. What Fortinet introduced this week is an extended detection and response solution, or XDR. And so endpoint detection and response detects and responds to threats on an endpoint based on input from that input. What an extended detection and response, an XDR solution, does is look at input from endpoints, but also from firewalls and gateways, and I mean all sorts of different inputs across the network environment. So it's getting a wider range of telemetry. It can kind of correlate better. So interesting product category. Fortinet isn't inventing it; they're entering the category. But what they do that they feel is differentiating is that they have added artificial intelligence to that system, so that the system is not only looking for, detecting, acting upon threats, it's also analyzing those threats for you. And if it determines that this is a legitimate issue, it is, to the best of its ability, remediating the issue for you. So they've automated the entire process from detect, analyze, respond, remediate, and then they'll close it out. Essentially, I don't know that they're actually feeding tickets to PSA systems, but human hands need never deal with the incident. You can see what happened, but you don't actually have to get involved with it. They are saying that on average, and this is based on beta testing, I believe, on average, the system reduces the volume of alerts that a security professional must follow up on by 77%. And the system can actually execute a process, from detection, investigation, response, all beginning to end. It might take a person 30 minutes to do that. They're saying their system can do it in a matter of seconds. So it's not necessarily going to take care of everything for you on an automated basis, but it takes care of the kind of easy stuff that can suck up a lot of time, and it frees up the people who have security expertise for more challenging, more important work. The market for this is primarily aimed from an end user perspective at mid-size and larger companies, probably not a fit for a smaller business. But they also have MSSPs, managed security service providers, in mind, because if you want to get into that field, or you just kind of want to get into a little more casually into managed security without being a full-blown MSSP, obviously, as we all know, it's hugely expensive to invest in people and tools and so on. And here's something that can kind of ease some of that financial burden a little bit for you, because the AI is handling a lot of the work on your behalf, and that. Also, even if you're already an established MSSP, introducing this product to the mix of systems that you have right now, Fortinet says, will make you more efficient. Your people are spending less time on triage of sort of routine security incidents, and obviously that goes straight to the bottom line. Your customers are paying you whatever a month. If you're spending less money on the expertise required to take care of them, you're going to be more profitable. And I guess the last point, just to say, and this kind of dovetails with what I was talking about before, is this is not a substitute for a SIM solution. It's sort of like a SIM light solution. It lacks some of the more sophisticated log analysis and correlation kind of capabilities, but it is kind of an interim step, for somebody who needs something like a SIM, can't afford a SIM, or isn't willing to buy one yet. It's a step in that direction. Fortinet has a SIM as well, and so they kind of see this maybe as an interim step on the road to people who are going to purchase that.
This is the doomed trial of Fortinet SIM, right?
Well,
yes,
it's,
exactly.
It's a gateway drug to using their SIM. But I wanted to ask, because I'm always fascinated by an industry so rich in TLAs. But all of our 3-letter acronyms that we're coming up with all the time. I thought XDR was extended dynamic range. I had to actually look at what they were using, and then I realized or remembered that Palo Alto's used that phrase for some time, part of their kind of extended ecosystem. And in a quick search, I noticed that now half the AV vendors out there are using that phrase. The problem is that there's all these gray edges, or there's now a big giant Venn diagram with hundreds of ovals in it that overlap mostly. What is a SOC? What's a SIM? Is it a SOC if all they're doing is attaching to the endpoint client? Or what makes it EDR or MDR or XDR? I don't even know how to explain that to folks anymore, or where these edges reside. And at some point, I hope the industry slows down a little, or at least matures to the point where you can realistically call something EDR, MDR, XDR, or just AV, and delineate between a SOC and a SIM, and figure out, et cetera, what we need to know to really understand how these products interleave or don't, snap together or don't, overlap or don't. It's incredibly hard. That's kind of my job nowadays, is to figure out what the moving parts are and which ones will mesh, and which is, how little we can spend and do as much as we should. And it's just so hard. It really is. I deal with 3 vendors now that cover the space we were just talking about, and I don't know that I have XDR. I need to figure that out.
Well, it gets more difficult too when they end up reusing acronyms for other things, because I think XDR was also like a type of RAM back in the day.
Yeah, wasn't it? That is correct. Yeah, I wasn't even going back to the hardware geek stuff. And I'm sure if you Google the phrase, you'll find 13 other fields that use that 3 different ways.
At least it doesn't sound like a disease, though.
No, much less so than anything else we've discussed so far. Don't
So
send me
Josh, I wanted to ask you, with so many vendors like Fortinet are adding more and more to their platform, do you see the day where you won't have 3, 4, 5 different security vendors? You might just settle on a platform, making it
we
easier?
have 12 right now. And yes and no. I mean, that one of the big debates in our industry is, do you go with best of breed for every product, or do you minimize your vendor stack? And there are obviously pluses or minuses. I actually wrote an article for you guys about this once. There's pluses or minuses to both choices. and they're all constantly changing. I would be shocked if we got to the point where we had a single security provider or even a couple. But I do think that consolidation will organically reduce the number of choices we have. And then I think that as you grow and mature your practice, you have to, even though you might have to support more solutions in one given category, as you get big enough, you will naturally rationalize or simplify your stack to become more manageable and more accountable. It's really hard. I mean, I do actually have 12 different security providers, including UTM in that number. But yeah, it's amazing. Maybe I think that it'll consolidate, Colleen, but I don't think quickly or soon.
So on the Fortinet solution specifically, because we haven't really dove in too much about just what this is, for someone who isn't offering a lot of advanced security like this and is dealing with threat analysis, I look at numbers like it'll reduce the volume of alerts by 77%. Now, Colleen, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but on the scale of percents, 77 is quite a big number of them.
Well, I would say that's fair to say it's a majority.
That's insightful analysis right there. Yes, it is. It is the majority. So, so Joshua, when you look at tools like this, I think your security stack's probably already a little beyond this, but for someone coming in, is this something that you would recommend to go to as kind of a gateway to better security offerings?
So sure, let me step back and say that we love to say things like 77%. That's a very difficult quantity or thing to quantify. So I would even no attack at Barracuda, but how do you measure that? And how do you Fortinet, no attack at them at all, but how do you quantify that? So consider.
I have a ruler that measures in percents.
I actually created something that converted from English units to metric and back to English when I worked for the Forest Service, just so you could have more precise calculations, because 80 square feet came back as 79.737 if you did it really poorly on an analog device. Anyway, the bottom line here is when people start out, they may very well select a much broader, they may select to use vendors with much broader offerings. They may keep that vendor count down. They may build their experience that way, much the way I refer to Nerdio as training wheels for Azure. This can be considered the training wheels for coming into security. You even have players where you tunnel all your traffic through them, lots of them now in our field, and they replace a great number of point products. You're putting all your eggs in that one basket, and you have to be careful about that, because that's the other edge of that same sword. Maybe there'll be a time when I can trust in a vendor well enough, but the other thing to consider is mergers and acquisitions and changes of policies, and they happen so constantly in our business that, again, if all your eggs are in one or two baskets, and that becomes $1,000 basket when it was a $200 basket last month, that could be tricky. I don't know how people sign 5-year contracts in my industry. I don't know how you can do that. Things change so fast. It's just amazing.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there's a lot of information here in this that we didn't, we kind of touched on the high points and in the last story too, but there's always a lot more in these articles to kind of dive into with more detail. So we encourage anyone who's listening to go to channelpronetwork.com, find the show sheet for episode 174, and then you'll find links to all of these different articles that you can actually go and read along and get all the detail. If you're watching on YouTube, same thing for you. Open up the description area and we have all the links conveniently placed for you right there. To go and check those out. And before we move on to the next story, I want to say, Joshua, I don't always worry about putting all my eggs in one basket. You know why?
You don't eat eggs.
I scramble them first.
Very good.
Come on, that was Rich. I got a little bit of a smirk from Rich, so I guess I'll take that as my my big reaction.
That's definitely a dad joke.
After all these years, I don't have ready access to a rim shot sound effect. I need to have that for Matt now and again.
Good point.
Good stuff. All right, so Fortinet is not our only security related story. We've got Huntress in the news, and they've got something new for Microsoft Defender. How does that work, Rich?
Yeah, so I'll give you a little backstory on this one as well. When Huntress, first opened their doors some years back, Kyle Hasselvan, the CEO of that company, said, "We are not introducing, we are never going to introduce an antivirus product. There are 74 of them out there. I refuse to be number 75 in the market." And they didn't. They didn't release an antivirus product. They did want to add a prevention level to a set of products that up until now have been focused on detection and response. But rather than create their own antivirus, what they've introduced is a managed antivirus service for Microsoft Defender, which is Microsoft's antivirus solution shipped for free with the Windows 10 operating system. So that product is now officially in public beta. When Huntress says public beta, that basically means this is ready to go. This product will be in public beta for about a year. They say, because they like to collect feedback and update and so on. But this is a whole ready to go, essentially 1.0 product out there right now. What it does, if you are interested in Microsoft Defender, but maybe have been reluctant to use it in the past, the reason why is probably because it's the only management for it is a single tenant console from Microsoft. So you're constantly logging in and out for different customers. So first and foremost, what this service does is give you a consolidated multi-tenant Microsoft Defender management environment where you can, as an MSP, you can take care of all of your customers in one place. On top of that, it gives you support, backup, expertise, assistance from the Huntress threat ops team. So they are helping you monitor and diagnose and suggesting steps that you can take to remediate issues and so on. Now this, Defender itself is free. This service is provided to existing and future Huntress partners at no additional cost. So Huntress announced last year this new policy where they are going to keep kind of rounding out their portfolio, adding additional services, but they will not raise the price when they do that. And this is not like a forever commitment, but right now, certainly they sort of feel like their margins are good. And they can afford to add more capabilities, more services to what they're delivering to their partners without raising prices. And so same for this managed antivirus service. If you're already a Huntress partner, you now have access to this. You're not going to be paying anything more for it. And this will coexist. This is probably worth calling out, is that you can use this and Microsoft Defender alongside other antivirus software. So if you like the sound of this in certain ways, you don't have to replace whatever antivirus this customer or that customer or all your customers are using to take advantage of the ability to have, the Huntress threat ops team providing you input on threats. Yeah, I think that about covers it.
So when I first read the headline and was kind of reading about it, I forgot that Microsoft's own control panel, because they have their own management tool for Defender. But you're right, it is single tenant only. So Joshua, how many MSPs rely on Defender as their kind of security? I guess it's like a base security AV solution, because you can always build on top of it. So what's your take on this? Is this something that you've wanted, to be able to manage Defender multi-tenant?
It's not in my portfolio, but it's a lot more common than I realized. Even I know of at least one MSSP who works with it. It should be pointed out that Defender is not just Defender anymore. It's now the linchpin of ATP, their advanced threat protection stack. So I'm wondering if you have to be running ATP to use the Huntress tool. It doesn't sound like it, but it sounds like it'll give you some of the capabilities in terms of management of that, as well as a multi-tenant interface. I should also point out that, you guys probably know there's other vendors out there that also provide this. One comes immediately to mind. Can I drop a name?
Yeah.
Another one. So RocketCyber does much the same. They have a suite of tools and services that integrate with and around Windows Defender. And honestly, I had never considered that a serious player until I heard a long discussion between an MSSP and Billy Austin at RocketCyber, the principal, or one of the two principals there. I was amazed how impressed they were with it and what they had to say. So 1.5 years ago, I would have written this off as a ridiculous thing, but I might have been wrong then. I would certainly be wrong now. It is a more capable solution than I ever would have guessed. Now, of course, they do have kind of an inside line there at Microsoft. They should have a pretty good handle on the low-level architecture of Windows. Sometimes they do things that make you wonder if that's true, but ATP and Defender in particular are rapidly evolving, and this sounds like an interesting thing. I'm still not at the point where I can emotionally commit to Microsoft to do the defense of its own OS. It's kind of like Colleen can attest to my ability to edit or spell check my own work. I'm pretty good at it, except I still don't always get it. I'm not entirely sure I would trust him to do that, but with Huntress or Rocket Cyber potentially in the equation, that might change it.
You know, I'm right there with you, Josh. I mean, if we were talking, I don't know, 2-3 years ago, the idea that anyone's antivirus of choice might be Microsoft Defender, which was Windows Defender at the time, or just any antivirus product from Microsoft, I would have been very skeptical of that. But yeah, certainly over the last 2 years, to be sure, I have had numerous conversations with people, and you mentioned Billy Austin. I haven't specifically discussed this with him, but people like him who really know what they're talking about have vouched for Microsoft Defender as being at least as good as the much more entrenched, in some cases familiar competitors out there. And I asked Kyle Hanselvan about this because, as regular listeners know, I worked at Microsoft once upon a time. That was like 20 years ago when they had a miserable reputation on security. And so the idea that, today anyone might consider them being a leader in some respects in security is still, an interesting concept to me. But Kyle said, yeah, this product is at least as good as anything else that's out there. I am staking my reputation and the reputation of Huntress on that. So, I mean, he's placing a big bet in Microsoft Defender being up to the requirements that are out there. And yeah, I hear that from enough people whose opinion I respect that I'm starting to believe it too.
So good stuff from Huntress. We'll have to see how this goes and how it's received as we go on. But I wanted to go ahead and switch gears here and turn to a story that recently ran in the ChannelPro magazine. So Colleen, by all means, tell us about how this came to be. It's called Managing Branches of One. What does that mean?
So naturally with the pandemic, everyone has got a remote workforce now, or they had a remote workforce during the height of the pandemic. And so we wanted to take a look at, how are MSPs keeping their employees engaged and productive and sane even. And I wanted to just circle back to something Josh said earlier in the segment about bandwidth being an issue. I mean, I think if nothing else, the pandemic has sort of laid bare a lot of deficiencies like bandwidth. Or if you had deficiencies in the way you communicate with your staff, or workers that didn't do well independently, that the pandemic has laid bare a lot of those issues. And so I talked to a few folks for this story about challenges they face with a remote workforce, as well as some best practices they've picked up. And I talk to MSPs really all year long for other stories I'm writing. So this issue has come up a lot. And so not only what I was able to get in the 1,200 words of this story, but just other, tips that I've got that I couldn't fit in the story. I think, we laid it out to be beneficial for our readers.
Yeah, would you like to share a couple of the highlights?
So sure. So getting back to the bandwidth issue, folks send people to work from home, and now they're on a home grade network versus a business grade network. So things may take a little bit longer, and employees need to make a little bit of accommodation for that. But I want to hit some of the top challenges. So when I talk about things that have been exposed, a management consultant I spoke with for this article talked about, if your business is already having issues with trust or communications, it's exacerbated now because supervisors don't know if they can trust workers at home. Workers don't know if they're getting the whole story. And so, that's a challenge in how to build trust and have better communication while everybody's at home. And the branches of one phrase, one of the MSPs I talked with, that's what he called it. He said he didn't create it, but when we used to think about remote workforces, it may be a small office that's not part of the mothership, or a salesperson that's traveling for part of the month, and those were the people you're supporting. But now you're supporting single workers at their homes, sharing their bandwidth with their children, their spouses, pets in the background. So there's lots of challenges. And so that brings up, personal situations. So today I'm working at home with my dog, who's not as smart as Josh's dogs, I'm sure, but still he can interrupt. So you have to bear in mind that there'll be distractions for workers at home, and you may need to be more flexible, that they can't be available for a last minute call or a Zoom meeting that they didn't expect. So planned communications was one of the tips, that if you're going to call a meeting, let people know in advance, because they may be giving their child lunch or helping with homework, and they're going to make up that time later in the evening. So flexibility is key. Josh, I was wondering if you're finding that with your workforce.
Yes, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, I've been turning my head to the side dealing with Teams messages, because I have an employee who's an engineer and very, very good, except 3 young children and a distracted wife. And he does a lot of the childcare during the middle of the day, and it can be very challenging just to get him to respond to a Teams message. And that can be very challenging when you have a big issue with a client going on at the same time. You mentioned bandwidth. And honestly, most of our businesses are working with what you guys would consider home bandwidth. And I consider even a Comcast business, any solution that goes up and down 20 times in a month, that's not a business grade solution. And that describes most of our Comcast circuits for the entire last 14 years. So there's that. And there's the fact that it's shared bandwidth. Don't forget that 3 kids and 1 married couple in a fairly well-equipped, reasonably smart home might have 20 or 30 connected devices. And it's not even just bandwidth. Then it's talking about, how many associations can their access point manage. And then we haven't touched on the fact that they're now sharing machines. And it may very well be that they're using the same machine that does Bitcoin mining and far more nefarious things to connect to work. They're probably not even working from a dedicated profile, which has its own problems. But the biggest issue is what you finished up with. I'm going to refer to this as the Einsteinian one, or the time and space issue. And not many people have an actual dedicated office. Now, I have a second large bedroom where I do kind of have a dedicated office, same computer, 8 cores, water cooled, NVMe, et cetera. It's wonderful. I've got a giant, big, broad panel. I use a 34-inch wide panel. I've got the same keyboard and mouse, microphone, and webcam. I'm really set up, but I have worked remotely on and off for a very long time. A lot of folks haven't. And all these transitions in the way they manage their personal life, their personal space, their equipment, their bandwidth, they weren't thought through. I just wrote an article about what happens when you cut so many corners that your square is now a circle. That's what we did for our remote users. We squared a whole lot, or circled a whole lot of squares, and now we got to square those circles. We got to make them secure and help them learn how to manage the other details that aren't technological. And even if it's just locking the door while they're at work, or at least most of the time, that makes sense. Or as you said, they want to work flexible hours. I'm all over that, but you have to have enough workforce to cover that 8 to 5 day. So sure, if somebody wants to take 11 to 2 off in the middle of the day and tack that on at the end of the day, or start late, or leave early, or whatever, that's great. But those are conversations that have to be had and plans that have to be made. And unfortunately, I don't think people are really doing that yet. They're just kind of faking it.
Right. And you mentioned the home office. So one of the pieces of advice that we received was, when employees are home, try to encourage them to have a routine. Not come to work in your pajamas. Start your day, at a certain time every day. Put on real clothes. End your day. Have a separation between your work and your personal life, if possible, with flexibility, of course. And then, because not everyone is cut out to work remotely, so the more routine you can add to the day, the better for some people. And then setting up your home office. There's been some studies that I found for this piece that not every business wants to provide additional equipment for their workers' home office. This particular MSP that I talked to, they gave everybody a budget of $200. Make your space comfortable and pleasant to be in, whether you need a new headset or you want to buy a plant, whatever is going to make you happy to sit at your desk during your 8-hour shift.
Yeah, I think that you'll find a lot of SMBs don't budget much for anything, especially IT. And then they just spend money when they think they have to. And that is the reality of the world we're in. And what happened is kind of the opposite of budgeting. As we started moving people remotely, I had a lot of people telling me, we can't spend money. They didn't know what the economy was or was going to be like. And that's actually still true. And anybody that serves small business, and I'm talking about businesses up to $10, $20 million, those folks that run those businesses frequently don't come from a business or accounting or financial background of any sort. And they frequently behave the way the smallest business owners do, which is they don't spend money based on what happened last year or what's happening now. They spend money based on what they think will happen next year. And because of that, it's kind of like the people refer to the stock market being a predictive mechanism. These folks are acting as their own little stock market. So when this pandemic hit and when the 24-hour news cycle saturated us in doom, and only somewhat justified, but what I'm seeing now is that a year later, almost, people are still telling me they don't know if they're going to be in business in 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months, and they're not spending the money they had to. Now, we had 2 or 3 larger customers. They bought laptops or small PCs, panels, a couple of firewalls went out there, and they did what they needed to do to situate at least their most productive workers. But 2/3 to 3/4 of our workforce at least did nothing. And they're still hoping it'll just go away. And that's not a good plan, so it is a challenge. Yeah,
right.
That $200 budget exceeds what most of our businesses gave each of their users.
Mm-hmm. Another challenge that people talked about was employee engagement. And I think the longer the pandemic has gone on, the more that becomes difficult. And so one mistake folks made in the beginning was maybe over managing and over monitoring. And people need to feel that, they were trusted. But everyone's struggling and a little bit. So finding events that, are inclusive. And so maybe not everyone is into a virtual happy hour or a wine tasting. Maybe find other events that people will feel comfortable participating in. And not every call or meeting has to be a video meeting. People acknowledged in the beginning, they kind of overdid it with team meetings and video meetings. And some things can be handled in an email. And as they trust their employees at home, those kinds of things are sort of transitioning.
It's too much when you're scheduling a Teams meeting to talk about whether or not you're having too many Teams meetings.
It's true. And speaking about Teams meetings, so I didn't get into this in my article because I kind of ran out of words. But if your techs are all home, one of the things that they used to benefit from was maybe being in a room together, and then if they were stuck on something, they could talk about it. And so now you're home, and you can message someone or email someone. Well, some MSPs have been experimenting with having an open Teams meeting. So the meeting's open all day long, and then you can actually, talk to each other throughout the day, or same way with Zoom. And some people are having some results with that. Josh, does that appeal to you at all?
Not in the face of it. I don't think I would want that going on full time. I think that once you master Teams or Slack or whatever your particular poison is, that you have a lot of that. But I used video meetings for a couple of legitimate and one nefarious purpose. I used to force my guys to get on a meeting first thing at the beginning of each day at 8 a.m. because I wanted to know that they were awake and dressed. Because one of them in particular can literally sleep until dark if nobody wakes him up. He just is that way. I'm kind of the opposite. I'm very lucky to sleep through till 6 a.m. But you know, part of that is the dogs and animals, other animals that need to be fed. But I like seeing them early on. I realized eventually that that was intrusive and it projected the wrong message. It's not that I distrust them, but I wanted to help them understand the concept of disciplining yourself to have, as you said, a routine. That's
Right.
something I'm all about, always have been about, even when I travel internationally. There's exact things I do at exact times, whatever time zone I'm in. But the folks that work for me are not that way. So I let that go. And now we have video meetings when we need to with vendors or clients, when we need to show and share screens and do things interactively like that.
Mhm.
Every now and again, just for morale purposes, as your article, I think, brought up as well. That's the hardest thing. It's really hard to build a camaraderie or to maintain camaraderie. And we all know that events, real events, I should say IRL, in real life events have gone away. And that, everything from the bar to checking into the hotel to standing out in the hallway, that's all gone away. And I don't know what replaces that. There's been some good efforts. You guys made a good effort with your virtual events, but maybe I'm just too old to accept that is going to replace interpersonal interaction. It might be a lot easier for somebody 20 who's used to, texting people at the same dinner table messages, but I don't think we can replace it easily. It's really challenging.
Right. And that's a great segue to kind of wrap up my segment here. So obviously, the world is altered. Research shows that people do like working at home for the flexibility, and that there'll likely be some sort of hybrid model when things get somewhat back to normal, that, you may spend part of your week working at home. And then the issue of getting back to the office, not everyone's going to be comfortable right away coming back to the office, even though you may want them to come back. And employers can't mandate vaccines. So that'll all have to be kind of ironed out, and we'll have to learn as we go how to have this hybrid working environment. Thank you guys for inviting me onto the show to talk about this topic, and I hope you all read the full article at channelpronetwork.com. And over to you, Matt.
Great. Thank you so much, Colleen. Appreciate that. And this is a pretty good time, I think, to switch gears and head into our interview. So I know earlier when we were talking about the Nerdio story, one of the points in there was kind of about its ability to help you, Rich, it was like it can kind of monitor usage so you can adjust things up and down. And that leads right into our interview segment. So we're going to go and we're going to listen to an interview with Jeff Valentine, who's the CTO of CloudCheckr. And we're going to talk a lot about that, about utilization, cost priority, and a lot of the things that they do and where they see the kind of the cloud landscape management headed. So really great interview. Stick around for that. And we're going to say goodbye to Colleen, but we'll see Mr. Joshua Liberman with us on the other side. Thanks. And we'll be right back. And welcome back to part 2 of ChannelPro Weekly. We've got a great guest interview lined up for you today. There's a lot of things going on in the cloud landscape, particularly last year, and here to talk about where things are kind of going, as well as the management and solutions challenges that are out there. Please welcome the CTO of CloudCheckr, Jeff Valentine. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Matt. Nice to be here.
Great having you here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about CloudCheckr?
Sure. Yeah, I'll tell you about CloudCheckr first. We are a governance platform. We help MSPs resell the cloud. We help secure the cloud and help save money on the cloud for MSPs customers.
Excellent. And tell us a little bit about you. What do you like to do?
Sure. I've been in the business for 20 years. Cloud business, not that long, unfortunately, right? It's only about a decade old. but we've grown fantastically. I've been with the company 3 years now, and work with the majority of the large MSPs and distributors that resell the cloud. My experience tends to be on research and development. We write software, and we build that software that solves these problems for MSPs.
Very cool. So I believe this is some kind of virtual background you're using for those who are watching, but I think I saw were those Eskimo snowshoes behind you? What is going on with this virtual background?
Yeah, my secret fetish is tree houses, and this is one that I built many years ago, maybe 5 years ago. I took a picture last time I was there from the proper angle to look like a real background.
So this is a place that you actually own?
Yes, yeah, that's my place. Yeah.
Wow. So you are into Eskimo snow marching?
No, I thought it looked cool on the wall.
So those snowshoes are, I've used those. I mean, I usually use modern ones, but those are impressive. If you guys know anything about snowshoes, I actually had a pair of those basket weave style shoes, leather bound, and they were amazing to me how well they worked. You know, the modern stuff is aluminum framed or even titanium if you're a mountaineer, and all kinds of nifty materials, and they do work a little better, but these things are amazing. They're super cool. Where is this location?
Upstate New York. I'm outside of Rochester.
Oh yeah, Cha-cha-cha, you said that. I'm from upstate New York myself. So
perfect.
So Jeff, is that kind of one of your hobbies? Are you kind of a big outdoors kind of person?
I love getting away from it all, and having a little cabin in the trees seems great. It moves nicely. You get this, what they call the Q factor, a little queeze, because it moves with the trees.
That's awesome. And how big is that place? I'm sorry, I'm stuck on this.
No, it's good. It's about the size of, these modern tiny house shows on TV. It's about that size, 200 square feet on the first level, and then there's a loft you can see in the upper corner.
Very, very, very cool. And yet, by week you are CTO of CloudCheckr. By weekend you are Eskimo snow guy.
Get away from it all, cool, right? Stuff. The opposite of technology.
Well, I raise Siberian Huskies, by the way, Jeff, which is a practical pursuit here in Albuquerque. But I don't know if you're a Zappa fan, but I can't not think of watch out where the Huskies go, and don't you eat that yellow snow. So what do you use to heat that location? Is it all wood?
There's a wood stove. You can't quite see it, but it's over here, sort of built in. And yeah, it's all wood. There's no utilities. It's candles, solar system for some lights once in a while.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Well, Jeff, when you're not in the treehouse, your job has you at the intersection of a couple of different things that we're paying a lot of attention to. Everyone's paying a lot of attention to in the industry right now, and one of those is the accelerated adoption of cloud solutions that I think we've all seen in the last year, and the other is some of the cloud management challenges that accelerated adoption has created. So maybe let's start with the adoption piece of that, because you folks must have, you've got this enormous database of end user environments that you're helping your partners support. What have you seen? I mean, just in terms of the volume of what's being used out there, what have you seen in terms of the pace at which SMBs in particular have been rolling out cloud solutions in these last 10, 12 months?
Great question. And to give you some context, CloudCheckr does have a rather unique view of the market, because our systems are used by, and we have visibility therefore into between 5 and 10% of the entire cloud infrastructure market. So it tends to be very large organizations use CloudCheckr, and they have lots of customers, and it sort of flows down like that. So as a result of that, yeah, we do have some interesting insights around this. What we've seen pre-COVID was a growth rate, compound annual growth rate that's in excess of the analyst numbers. So, you'll hear folks like Gartner and Forrester talk about 40%, 39%, et cetera, sort of CAGR numbers in this infrastructure business. We're seeing that some segments are growing much faster than that, in particular MSPs. For us, they grow much faster, and we think that's because of the compounding effect. Their customers are growing at about that rate, and so their spend goes up at about that rate, but MSPs themselves are getting more customers. And as they acquire more customers, you get this compounding effect, which we think it's a fantastic opportunity, therefore. We also see a lot of MSPs moving up market. And so as they transition away from SMBs, we actually see perhaps more opportunity for MSPs to address the SMB market, because the larger ones, as they quote unquote grow up, don't want the SMBs as much anymore. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity there. From a confidence standpoint and velocity standpoint, what CloudCheckr is in this unique position to do is help drive confidence in the cloud. And we do that because we're always watching for cost overruns or security issues or compliance problems. And that makes companies go faster. It's unique if you think about it, that we help companies spend more in the cloud by helping them spend less in the cloud. And that dichotomy is because on a project, you'll save money, maybe 30% on any particular project, but you'll do more projects because you're confident you hit the numbers. So now in 12 months, instead of doing 3 projects, you do 4. And we see that all the time in the MSP space. It's a key driver of the value prop we provide to MSPs.
Now, you guys were doing cloud management, well before COVID, obviously, well before a lot of MSPs out there were dealing with multi-cloud environments and some of the challenges that you guys are set up to address. I mean, from your standpoint, what are the biggest issues that MSPs run into around managing cloud environments for their customers?
Sure. The number one issue, actually, it's profitability. I think we've all seen the rates at which MSPs get compensated for reselling what is effectively a commodity, infrastructure as a service, tend to be rather low. 8, 12, 15, 20%, something like that. They don't go very high compared to other software services. And you can't make money on 10% gross margins. So you have to do other things. A lot of MSPs use this as an intro to professional services. They'll do digital migrations to make up the difference. And they're okay making 10 points of margin. The reality is there's much more opportunity out there for margin enhancement. And that's what CloudCheckr software does. Effectively, we are a billing system for MSPs. We help MSPs create custom charges, discount structures. We help them buy reserved capacity, RIs in the AWS parlance. We help them buy RIs and share that benefit across multiple clients. Even if the customer's not willing to make a RI commitment, or maybe they're only willing to buy 30% coverage on their capacity, the MSP can buy more and spread that risk over across lots of clients. That's how we help MSPs turn 10 points of margin into 30 points of margin on cloud resale. So that's the number one thing that we see as a challenge in this market, is how do you just maintain that profitability and build a recurring revenue stream? You do so by using a tool like CloudCheckr to help you enhance your margins. The number 2 thing that we see is the complexity of managing an environment after you've done a digital transformation project. So a lot of MSPs will go into an SMB or an enterprise and say, we'll help you move this app. And then they do it. After they do it, they have to keep on running it for a long time. And then if something goes wrong, that revenue stream goes away. It's not as sticky if you make a mistake. So CloudCheckr is there with our best practice checks to be your backstop. And we continuously and automatically check for this. That's the second thing we see MSPs challenged with and why we solve for that.
One of the things that's interesting about that, a big part of what you do, as I understand it, is cost optimization around cloud environments. Do I have the right kind of instances? Do I have the right amount of capacity and so on? And I mean, I have normally thought of that as something that an MSP is doing on behalf of the end user, essentially helping the end user sort of optimize their cloud spending. But it almost sounds like your primary focus is more helping the MSP optimize their cloud spending. So you're pulling together resources that you're reselling to your end user, and you want to be as efficient as possible with that, so that you're making as much margin as you can on the stuff that you're reselling. Am I correct about that? That the optimization you do is really more for the MSP partner?
What's interesting is it's definitely for both. And we have direct clients, for example, it tends to be larger enterprises that use us directly for this cost savings opportunity. And in a lot of cases, the MSPs that we sell to will expose that functionality directly to their end customers. We're pretty unique in the fact that we allow white labeling of our solution. So it looks like the MSP's product that has their URL, their SSL certificate, their privacy policy. To that extent, it becomes their product to their customer, and their customers can then self-serve using our technology. So that's certainly a key focus. But in addition to the cost savings, there's a separate module for MSPs almost exclusively that allows them to enhance their margin by taking additional risk and spreading that risk across lots of clients. So that is something that mostly MSPs benefit from beyond the direct enterprise.
Now, you were talking before about, the margins are modest, simply reselling cloud capacity, but there are ways to layer services on top of that. So I mean, talk about that a little bit, and maybe how it ties into your product. But just for anyone in the audience who's thinking about how do I make more profit on the cloud services that I'm offering to my customers, what are some of the opportunities they should be thinking about?
Sure. This is the pattern we've seen, and it's there's nothing special about this pattern or proprietary to any one MSP, but we've seen that MSPs can enter into almost a lead gen conversation with clients by offering things like on AWS, the well-architected review. And these well-architected reviews can help funnel in a lot of opportunity as you evaluate for a business for a very small cost, what's whether or not they're set up correctly for the cloud. That turns into a proposal in many cases for ongoing work. Maybe it's a new digital transformation project, or geez, did you know you can move this over here and make it more redundant or more secure or cost less? That turns into an ongoing engagement to resell them cloud. Not only the one-time money from professional services, but the recurring money for being their reseller and ongoing service provider. And that's where we think a lot of the MSPs then are able to drive a lot of lifetime value. These customers are very sticky. There's a reason they're working with an MSP. They don't want to build this expertise in-house, even if they could find the talent. An MSP is expert at servicing this type of client, and they use our software to help them do that.
We were talking about the cost optimization piece of the picture before. And again, there are a number of programs that address that issue. So clearly, that there is an opportunity there for people to optimize their cloud spending, and that always makes me wonder how non-optimum is the average end user or average MSP's cloud spending right now. I mean, do you guys have any sense for the amount of waste basically that happens out there?
Absolutely. It's very clear. It's completely non-opinion based because we have facts around this. Our software tracks it. On average, we see a 30% cost savings for our clients. Now, a lot of customers will ask, and it's a really interesting point, why don't I just sign up for CloudCheckr for a month, get my cost savings, and then cancel? The reality is, if it was like premise, if it was like putting a server in a rack and running a data center, that would be fine. The cloud, however, is always changing. And what was true today is not true tomorrow, and somebody could push the wrong button, stop an EC2 instance, and forget to disassociate and terminate the EBS volume. They could leave something running by accident. They could be exposed to a hack that allows somebody to run mining, Bitcoin mining on the weekends and not notice it after until $100,000 is spent. All of these things happen regularly, and the cloud is changing so rapidly, you actually need a continuous monitoring solution to keep you saving money. So what you're saving today on day one, you're going to save again at day 60 because you're going to have the same sorts of problems that cause the cost overruns in the first place. There are exceptions to this. We see some organizations that are super well optimized. They've built practices around cost savings, and they look every day. They usually have a staff. They have like 5 people dedicated to cost savings across a large enterprise. Most folks can't afford that. We also see the opposite end of the spectrum. There's a customer of ours, an MSP, that drove 70% cost savings for a client they brought on during COVID. That client was actually doing a lot of testing and vaccine development, I believe. This was public and part of reInvent this year, which is why I can quote the number, but they saved 70% on their cloud costs, which is just a huge number. So depending on where you are in your journey, you're probably wasting some money. On average, we see it at 30%, but we've seen much more.
One of the other areas that you guys play in is around cloud security. And what from a CloudCheckr point of view is maybe different about cloud security, more challenging about it?
No, it's great. There's 2 categories in my mind of cloud security. There's a type of cloud security that looks at the application layer. That usually means installing an agent and running software in every compute instance that you've got. There's a little bit of agent bloat in the industry. And if you guys have used any APM tools or things like that, everybody wants their own agent. And all of a sudden, 30% of your compute capacity is taken up by agents. So it's not an ideal solution. CloudCheckr went the other direction, where we don't have an agent installed in any compute instances. Instead, we're looking at the infrastructure configuration, and we're looking at our own body of IP. It's our intellectual property. That's best practice checks around how things can go wrong. We've seen them go wrong for a decade now. What have people done that's incorrect from a security standpoint? We then show that back to clients through our web interface, and we allow them to remediate it. I'll tell you that a lot of our clients, especially MSPs, will use this as a prospecting tool. They will load prospect data into CloudCheckr. They will show them our best practice report of red, yellow, green. Here's what's wrong. Oh my God, did you know? Did you know? Did you know? All these red marks on a dashboard. And then they go back to the client and show it to them in a PowerPoint and say, if you choose us as your MSP, we're going to use this tool and we're going to continuously monitor and find and fix these things. It also then creates a to-do list for your ProServe business. So we end up helping and supporting our MSPs in that way because there's honestly so much chaos in the cloud and so much change. Humans alone can't do it.
So I want to get Josh's take here real quick. So Josh, as an MSP and someone who provides these services, do you and your company have like practices kind of built in around cost savings, or what are some of the challenges that he's talking about kind of resonating with you?
Well, first I want to ask about the APM concept. I assume you mean application performance monitoring?
Yes, like Datadog, for example.
Yeah, we're such a TLA-rich organization or industry. I want to make sure we talk about the same thing. So the short answer is no, I don't actually have a cog in our wheel that does anything like this at this point, nor have I crossed paths with people who've discussed it. I think that it's in the S part of the MB space. I don't know of anybody doing this. For a little while, I thought you were doing things along the lines of Nerdio in terms of simplifying deployment of Azure for folks that are just getting a leg up, but that's not the case. For a little while, I thought you were going to tell me that you were all about security, application security in the cloud. Obviously, you touch upon that, but that's not the case. It almost feels like you own this space. Do you see that you have direct competitors in this space that I'm just ignorant of?
There's a few, and honestly, they've all been either acquired or there are some capabilities for any one cloud environment built into the native cloud tools. And for very small businesses, when you have one IT person with the keys to the kingdom, that person's probably not going to make a mistake. Some of our clients have 300 people with the keys to the kingdom. They're large banks or large distributors. They can't trust that any one person won't make a mistake, even if it's not nefarious. Somebody could make a mistake, push the wrong button, leave the wrong thing on, and cost a lot of money or create a security hole very quickly. That's when CloudCheckr really becomes valuable, either for MSPs that have a lot of clients and they need to distribute this value across all of them, or for any one single large organization. We add a lot of value there.
It's kind of funny, Josh, as you were asking those questions, saying it kind of sounded like you did this, but it wasn't. For a second, when we were talking about spreading risk among customers, I thought he sounded kind of like an insurance salesman.
Well,
right.
So Jeff, one of the things I do when I learn about a new category in this industry, most of the time the people that present it don't do a good job. You did. But I often have to kind of reformulate or summarize back to them what I think they just said. I don't really feel like I need to do that here, but will you indulge me for a moment?
Please.
See if I can do this, because it's brand new to me. So from what I understand, your bread and butter is that you can do an analysis of how different companies are cloud provisioned, look at their utilization and provisioning, and figure out if it's optimized, as well as potentially provide them options to change that provisioning and improve the performance or cost ratio, or price to performance ratio of the services they're getting through the cloud. Is that fair?
You've got it. That is a key part of our solution, and you've encapsulated like a third of it.
Okay, good.
You've nailed it. Yes.
1/3 is a start, but
the other third is Eskimo shoes sales.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's hiking in the woods. Right.
But the third I think I'm most missing is I don't understand the security aspect of your provisioning or your offering. Can you dive into that a little more if it's okay with you guys? Okay.
Yeah, let me give you an example, because I think an example, I learned by example, right? So let me share an example and help make that more clear. Here's a very common issue that used to be a problem 5 years ago, largely is not a problem anymore. Somebody creates an S3 bucket on Amazon, accidentally leaves it open to the world, and puts things in it that have social security numbers or the CEO's email backup or something. And then that makes it to the front page of the Wall Street Journal. That kind of public S3 exploit is largely solved because there's lots of tooling around this now. Everybody knows that's a common vector for information leaks. That's one of the 600 things that we check for. There are 599 other things like that. Configuration problems. Did you know that you're using your root account to log into AWS and you don't have MFA enabled? You probably shouldn't be using your root account. You probably should have MFA enabled. Those are two separate checks, for example. Things like that we look for, we expose the problem, we help you remediate it by giving you documentation around it. And if there's a compliance impact and you might have to track to HIPAA or PCI or whatever, we show you that as well. And we provide the body of evidence for your auditors.
And Jeff, we've got time. If you want to dive into the other 597, we're all ears.
That would be crazy. but CloudCheckr.com has a great description. You can go right there.
So I do want to pursue that just a little more.
Sure.
So one of the things that happened to me in my business is that an unnamed vendor that I deal with for security products published an open form that had my bank account information, credit card numbers, etc., an unprotected Google form of some sort. And I don't use their services for that, so I don't have the details. But I was made aware of it by a member of the ASCII group who found it just casually poking around to see who screwed up. And that, of course, led to a long process of closing a credit card, getting a new one, et cetera, et cetera. And there was a lot of auto charges to mess with. It occurred to me at that point that a service that scouted for that information, and I'm not talking about dark web stuff. This is the bright web, right? This is the web that we use legitimately. But you mentioned finding a flaw in the configuration of AWS that can obviously be exploited. Is there anything along the lines of what I just brought forward to you? Like, for example, finding that people have not locked web forms or have provided them. Is there a way we can get to that? Can you provide us information on such exposures, or better, our vendors on such exposures when they mess up?
That's a great question. There is a space around looking at the contents of your files, for example. There are services out there, we don't, that will scan the contents of your files and say, that looks like a social security number. That looks like a credit card number. You probably shouldn't have that without this type of encryption in place, for example. So we'll detect whether or not the configuration is right, whether or not you have the right encryption, whether or not you have the right permissions. There's obviously lots of complexity around permissioning. That's the type of thing we do, but we don't ever see the contents of files. There's a whole separate space in the security industry where you actually install software usually because you don't want it going over the internet, and they look at the contents of your data. The nice thing about CloudCheckr is we don't ever have access to that. We're never in the critical path. So we can't actually see the data, the private data that's inside your applications. We simply look at the configuration of them in the cloud.
Okay, so I'm going to refer to this in a sense as delivery optimization or utilization, cost to utilization optimization, a security check, or the ability to discover patently insecure deployments or configurations.
Yes.
That's two, but you did imply there were three spokes to the wheel there.
Remember that way we help MSPs make money. The margin enhancement for MSPs, and the fact that we are, in effect, the invoicing and billing system for MSPs is the third leg of that stool.
Okay, and how is that delivered? Is that an analysis that you perform on an ongoing basis that you deliver to the MSP? Is there a live console or tool of some sort?
Mm-hmm. That is exactly what CloudCheckr is. Log into our web interface, configure your customers within it. They might be within one account, they might be in their own multiple accounts. Each customer may have their own set of accounts. That grouping of accounts and the custom charges related to them. You won that customer by saying, I'll give you 12% off of your S3 storage, but only 3% off of your compute. That custom charge ability and repricing of the cloud is inherent to what we do. Of course, part of that is the financial arbitrage, as you said, Matt, the insurance aspect of being able to spread risk over a large number of clients. We allow you to buy, and we recommend reserved instances that you can buy above and beyond those purchased by your customers for the purpose of margin enhancement.
So that was a yes. So I guess what I'm asking is that capability. For example, one of the great challenges that small businesses never understand is when you deliver Azure, you can pay for play, right? You can pay per compute cycle or pay per bandwidth or pay per hour. You can also get flat rate deliveries. Do you have the ability to look at people's workloads and determine what is the best solution for them based on that?
You've got it. We look at the actual utilization and we recommend the right sizing for these things, the resizing of those things. And of course, for the MSP, you can choose as the MSP whether or not to expose that to your customer. They may want a flat rate, even though you're paying on demand. We do that repricing.
That's a great way to lead this presentation, or when you come out to talk to MSPs. My wife was in a hospital for a week recently, and fortunately not COVID related, and she's fine. But before she got released, her surgeon called me and he started the conversation with, Mr. Liberman, I have some very bad news for you. Now, I didn't expect it to be what you might think it would be when you start. And what the very bad news was that she had to spend another day in the hospital. After about 3 minutes of him talking, I said, so I'm going to suggest, and he comes from another culture, and it may be a cultural thing, but I said, I'm going to suggest you start the next phone call like this with the words, your wife is fine, but we have some, and he laughed and he said, I'm used to do these in person. I said, yep. And then there are visual clues, body language, plus you'd be there. So yeah, you're giving up a lot. The reason I bring this up is I would say start with the moneymaker. When you're presenting this to MSPs, this is a tool you have not only to make money, but to make money in a way that it's not just a markup on top of something. Your customer isn't going to say, hey, that's more than I can find it on Amazon, so to speak. That's a great opener. And then the whole rest of it follows for sure. But that would have caught my that part of my eye anyway.
Well said. No, thank you, Josh. And let me just say this. Josh, your MSP is fine, but we can help you make more money.
Yeah. No, okay, that's a good start.
All right.
Will you guys give me about 60 seconds of a break? I'm alone in the building receiving a delivery. Is it okay for me to grab that and come back?
Yeah, go ahead. Okay. Rich, I believe you had one more question you wanted to ask. We are running close to the end of time here. So Rich, why don't you go ahead and fire off that last question?
Yeah, well, we've been talking about a number of different things in the realm of software as a service, infrastructure as a service, but all the cloud prognosticators still, I think, believe that the future is mostly going to be in hybrid cloud. So I'm just curious if there is a dimension, I mean, in terms of what you do or what MSPs have to think about that touches the private cloud portion, the in-house portion of a hybrid environment.
Absolutely. Yeah, what's interesting, and we've seen this more so this year than ever, but you start to hear two things uniquely during the big presentations from Amazon and Azure and GCP this year. The one thing that Amazon in particular is talking about is machine learning, and it's everywhere, and everything is now an ML tool. The second thing you hear about is run anywhere. And it's not just necessarily hybrid. It's not necessarily this environment versus that environment. It's literally run anywhere, whether it's an edge location or in a different cloud environment or on your own premise. What Amazon has done in this space is pretty unique and special. And GCP in many ways with Anthos has done the same. The ability to have an environment be interacted with and configured and managed in the same way, regardless of its location, the same APIs work. And Amazon, I think, is doing a great job there. And tools like CloudCheckr are certainly, when you talk to the Amazon configuration, it doesn't really, we don't even know where it's running, whether it's in this area or some other region or some hybrid location. Now, what's different about that is that's not usually how people refer to hybrid. They usually think of hybrid as VMware, putting some set of VMs on from a local data center into your environment. There are tools for that. CloudCheckr is not that system. We are squarely focused on the cloud interfaces and focused on building and optimizing for cloud environments. That is where I think the industry is going, by the way. Regardless of where it's running in a hybrid environment, it'll still look and feel like cloud.
Well, very, very good stuff. Jeff, unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to thank you for coming on. I'm sure could fire you more questions and learn more about it. But since we can't do it here, where can we go to learn more about CloudCheckr and get in touch with you if need be?
Super easy, cloudcheckr.com, and all the contact information is there. Happy to interact with anybody that has questions. Thank you, Matt.
Good. And do you have any places that you recommend to buy Eskimo snowshoes?
Geez, I don't. I got those at a garage sale.
I do. Actually. If you ever happen to be in Northwest Colorado in Steamboat Springs, there's a magnificent selection of all these items there. And now I can't remember the name of it. Oh my goodness. Oh well, look it up. Steamboat Springs. They carry everything. And by the way, any place you can rent Husky teams from Flagstaff to the Pacific Northwest, you can usually buy everything from mucklucks to those snowshoes.
Wow, I was just kidding. And Josh, like that was a killer answer to all that. I didn't realize you actually would know any of these places. That's amazing.
I love snow, cold, high altitude, and husky.
Awesome stuff. Well, thanks again, Jeff Valentine, CTO of CloudCheckr. Thanks for being on, and hopefully we'll have you back in the future. For everyone else, we're going to take a short break. When we get back, we'll have Joshua Liberman joining us on the other side, where we wrap up the show with some of our regular end of the show features, and Rich will try to predict the future, often to hilarious results. Stick around for that. We will be right back. And we are back. We're going to wrap up this particular episode. We have some regular end of the show features we normally do. But before we move on to those, Rich, I want to just say it was a great interview we had with Jeff Valentine. Very interesting stuff. Joshua, it sounded like you learned a lot. Any takeaways that you want to talk about there, Rich? Either of you?
Well, I had literally not considered the possibility that there were vendors that did what they did. So, I was amazed. Not that it needs to be done, but that somebody's building a business around that. And I think I'm going to summarize it. I won't steal the thunder of your next segment, but they are basically a cloud overwatch group that looks at utilization and maximizes your cost benefit ratio across multiple clouds. And that's clearly something that needs to be done, especially for larger and more diverse shops. They also provide a bit of a security overwatch and a check your work kind of guys. I'm impressed that the cloud has matured to the point where that can actually be a dedicated service. They're kind of cloud optimization as a service providers, COSPs, and I didn't think that was coming. And if I did just make up a new term, cool.
COSB. You know what? You got to figure out how to get a Y at the end of that, because then you'll have created the Cosby.
Cosby, that's probably not a good idea right now. Okay, I'll turn that over to you,
Rich. Rich, any takeaways?
What comes to mind is just so it's interesting to me that even somebody as experienced as Josh is sort of new to that particular function that CloudCheckr performs, right? And there are other companies that do that kind of cost optimization thing in particular. Even Kaseya, some years back, bought a company called Unigma that does that. And we're at this place right now, and I think we've talked about this probably before on the podcast, where there are companies like that out there that they've maybe been around for a while, or they're popping up, they're coming into being, smaller companies that understand there's a lot of need around cloud management, cloud security, different aspects of that. And then you've got the entrenched, the established players, the Dattos and the ConnectWises and the Kaseyas and so on, who are aware of that and are working hard now to kind of catch up and add that capability to their platforms. And it feels to me like we're in the cheap seats watching this race. Do the incumbents, are they nimble enough? Because they've certainly got the money and the resources, are they nimble enough to pivot and get the features and the functionality that MSPs need out to them before one or more of these smaller companies can become bigger companies? I really don't know how this kind of plays out, but CloudCheckr is a great example of this phenomenon where there are companies that may be new to a lot of people in the audience out there right now, doing something that a lot of people are going to find really necessary and helpful. And the question is just, where do they wind up fitting into the vendor ecosystem alongside the top of mind names in management software for MSPs.
Yeah, for sure. It will be interesting to see, particularly as you noted, the whether or not the current big companies that MSPs rely on, normally the big RMM companies. We'll see if they start bringing a lot of these kinds of newly needed capabilities on board. So fun stuff. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and switch to our museum segment here. So for those who might be new to the show, as a lot of people who have been listening for a long time know, I have a large variety of old electronic devices. I would call it perhaps a hobby. My wife would call it a serious hoarding disease. Whatever you want to call it, it is to your benefit. But Rich, you're going to be proud of me, because over the weekend, and I'm not lying, I have 5 old computers ready to go to the recycler. I am starting the great purge, Rich.
That is great stuff. That is great. You know what, though? It just popped in my head when you said that. Before you recycle them, call the local school district.
Some of this stuff is way older than, especially the one I'm starting with. This is like Windows 95 era stuff.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
actually know of 2 folks in our industry that maintain informal, I guess, museums. Both of them are ASCII members, different parts of the country. And if you do have stuff you think might have historical interest, drop me a line and I'll reach out to them and see if they're interested. They'll pay to ship it to you or ship it to them if they want it.
I'll let you know. And I stuff that has historical significance, I do generally keep. A lot of this stuff I'm getting rid of is stuff that just really has no value. It's old desktops and stuff that nobody really wants.
I don't want to get in the way of your unhoarding either. So
appreciate that. But I got a fun one. So while I was getting a machine ready to take the recycler, I knew I've had this all the whole time, but it's been in there and it was a working machine, but I extracted it for our enjoyment. And this one, Rich, is going to stay in the permanent museum. So what my museum pick this week is one that we kind of touched on when we talked about this old machine that I held up a while back, but we didn't actually get to take a look at it. So I'm going to hold up to the camera for those who are watching. For those who are not watching, I'm going to hold up I'll describe a processor. Now, Joshua, when you think of a processor, what do you think of?
Well, I'm thinking of a CPU.
A CPU, right? With the little pins or whatever on the bottom you put in. Well, I'm going to hold this one up to the camera.
Oh, that's an easy one.
Yeah, this is an easy one, but no, not many people have seen one of these. So for those who are listening, what I'm holding up is an Intel Pentium II desktop CPU, and this was a weird time in processors. The one time where like they didn't have there wasn't a socketed processor that you would buy and put in a board in a socket. It was actually packaged and put on like a kind of a daughter board that would go into a slot. So you would put it on just like a PCI expansion card, but that's where the processor and related components were. So Josh, I'm sure you've seen these before.
We built with them, and here's your trivia question. Why is it in that, by the way, what's that form factor called? Because it has a very specific name. And why did they do that? Why is it on that form factor? Do you
Great
know?
question. And I'm going to have to go back in memory to see if my memory serves me correctly. This is called a cartridge.
The processor, it's called a processor cartridge. It goes into slot 1.
Slot 1.
But they built it that way because they couldn't bring the manufacturing process down enough to get the cache and the processor into a small enough form factor to work on the board, on the bus, such that they could bring enough power to it and not create too much noise. So they had to move it off to this daughter card, as you called it, to get that to work. And it led to probably the most hated Intel processor of all time. And it was in the same form factor. Do you remember what I'm referring to? It was
most hated?
It was the Celeron variant of that chip without any L2 cache.
Oh, that's
such
right.
a dog. It was a 300 megahertz. I'll say dog as a dog lover, but it was just so slow that it became the bane of their marketing. Yeah, so boy, that was a lot of crap. Yeah, we built those. I certainly did way back in the day. I've been building PCs since 90 and servers since 1990.
Yeah, so when you're talking about the reasonings for this, I remember that the Pentium Pro was the one that kind of preceded this, and they were having major yield issues. I know you're talking about like heat and stuff, and I know that the L2 cache on the Pentium Pro I think was faster, if I remember correctly, and that's where there was a little bit of controversy. But I know they had to separate that because they were having a lot of problems producing enough chips in that line too.
There was both heat and noise issue, and then that was partly the problem for yields were a problem as well. And they just figured that they needed to move this thing off to this daughter card, but it was dropping using the same form factor, but dropping a Celeron chip on it, which was essentially just that chip at a slightly slower speed. Most of those were 350 meg, Celerons were 300, but no cache. And that L2 cache was so crucial that they were terrible. We were fortunate enough not to sell any, but I knew other guys that were contemporaries who were having people bring them back. They were that slow. I mean, most people don't notice, at least nowadays. But
I'll have to put that on my list to find. I've never had one of those roll through my my particular docile here, but I will, or don't, whatever. Yeah, whatever. What do you call it?
domicile? Yeah.
Domicile. Not docile. That means my domicile is very docile, Josh.
That's so lucky.
So on this one particular, so this one is the original Klamath architecture. This is the original Pentium II. This is the 266 megahertz variant. Had 512 kilobytes of L2 cache, as we were talking, that ran at half the speed of the processor. And had a US MSRP when it released of $775. So yeah, I was fascinated by the Pentium 2s, and this slot configuration cartridge. There was a Pentium 3 model that was built into a cartridge, and then the socket 370 came during the P3 era, and then we didn't see cartridge designs like this anymore. But just a crazy time in processors compared to like what we've had now.
I did not know that there was ever a P3 on that particular architecture. You can grab one of these for $61 on eBay right now if you hurry. But yeah, that is really something. I remember the first time we picked those up, our first thought was, oh, cool. And then we started to actually use them and benchmark them and play with them. And we thought, oh, not so cool. But yeah, we have come a long way.
We have, and it's too bad too, because this was so easy to pop out and replace. I guess like
That's
this one
true.
was passively cooled, and now you have to have these massive coolers. So I don't know if you could do something like this with computers again, but it was kind of neat to have something you could just pop out and like you could throw in the faster version if you needed an upgrade.
There's lots of new passive cooled stuff, Rich. We actually, some of the low end NUCs are passive cooled. There's no moving parts at all in like a Core i3 NUC or many of the mini machines. And
those are mostly mobile hardware. That's like mobile processors though, right? Not desktop.
No. They're soldered on, so they're not pin, PGA or anything, but no, they're not mobile processors. Now,
really, they're actual the desktop variants?
Yeah, there are desktop low voltage and even ultra low voltage desktop variants out there. But this is typically there are 2 cores where you might have 4. So the newest Core i3s have 4 cores, but these low end ones have 2. And 8 core CPUs have 6 and 6 have 4. So they are reduced, and they're reduced in clock speed, but they're still passively cooled and quite fast, some of them.
Very, very cool. We'll have to check those out. So yeah, fun stuff. So that's my museum pick. So my tech pick, I usually like to kind of play that was then, this is now. So I didn't put a whole lot of thought into this tech pick. I basically said, well, if I was going to go buy an Intel specific desktop processor today, what would I get if I went to the original release price of this of $775 without going over, right? So we're going to play a little bit of processor prices right. And the one that I landed on here was, drum roll please, the Intel Core i9-10940X X series processor, 3.3 gigahertz base clock speed, 19.25 meg cache, big old processor here with this says MSRP of $699. Everywhere I looked at, like street prices was actually higher than that, but not over those $775. So this is kind of like what you could get today. And if we wanted to talk about how much faster that Core i9 is compared to this, Joshua, how would you try to quantify that?
Just by MIPS or something, use one of the standard tests, but you're going to ask me what the difference is. I'm going to guess 7 or 8 or 100 or more times faster, but I don't actually know that.
Yeah, and maybe we could just make it easy and just say a whole heck of a lot faster than than this thing ever was or could be. But of course, in another 15, 20 years, I'll be talking about the Core i9 X series processor in my museum pick, and then we'll be talking about the latest and greatest Core i17 and how much of a dog the 10940X was. So
or if we make some very poor choices as a culture or a nation or a planet, we'll be talking about who has nicer rocks.
we always need better rocks. I like good rocks. So anyway, that's my museum pick, Pentium II, a very fun one. This is going into the permanent museum because it's just so wacky and different than what processors, CPUs like that generally are sold like and look like. And then of course my tech pick, the Intel Core i9. Go pick yours up today. Rich, if you can, why don't you tell us what we might have missed and what might be coming ahead in the future?
Well, you know what? A great place to go if you want to know what you might have missed is our In Case You Missed It column, which appears on ChannelProNetwork.com every Friday, written by our own James Gaskin. This week, he's got news about Ivanti buying Cherwell, a security vendor, distribution deal between Pax8 and Rocket Cyber, and an interesting story out of China about what happens when you try to run an entire railroad on Adobe Flash. No kidding, it doesn't end well. Now, looking ahead to next week, well, first and foremost, we were so good, we were so disciplined, Matt, we didn't even plug our own show. We've got a Cybersecurity Online Summit happening next week, events.channelpronetwork.com if you want to learn more about it. Josh is going to be in one of the sessions in that event, as a matter of fact. So that is next week. So is the first quarterly meeting of 2021 for the IT Nation Evolve peer groups, which some of you out there still think of as HTG peer groups. And then some interesting news from the world of managed services software vendors that I'm pretty sure we're going to be talking about in the show next week. That will be as much of a hint as I drop. And then quick note, I think I said we'll be talking next week, actually, but our next show will be 2 weeks from now. We're taking next week off because of that conference I just referenced, but we will be back soon, folks.
Yes, we will be. Big thanks to our guest host today, Joshua Liberman, president and founder of Net Sciences. Joshua, thanks for being thanks for being on today. I hope you had fun.
Yeah, I did. Thank you for entertaining my oddness. I appreciate that.
You are welcome. And for those who want to learn a little bit more about you or get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Well, the simplest answer would be netsciences.com or info@netsciences.com or never mind. That's it. Let's stick with just netsciences.com and info@netsciences.com for email.
Fantastic. All right. Check those folks out. Check them out there. And of course, if you want to subscribe to the Channel Pro Weekly Podcast, that is what we recommend and encourage. It's good for you and it's good for your health. So you can get that anywhere: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, anywhere podcasts are found. You should find us there. If you want to subscribe to us on YouTube because you like to watch things, you can do that. Hit the red subscribe button and the bell to get notifications. ChannelProNetwork.com is the website. Go there each and every single day. First thing you do in the morning to get the latest news, articles, white papers, documents, downloads, podcasts, all kinds of great stuff to help you grow your business and make more money and stay on top of what's going on in this crazy, crazy industry, thanks to great reporters like Mr. Rich Freeman. So do that. Follow us on the socials. And as Rich said, we're taking a hiatus next week, but we will be back with episode 175 in a couple weeks. And you'll just have to wait and see who we've got on. See you then.